because I already see now traditional QA is quite dead. So you need more skills to stay relevant in the market. So it can already do basically the whole job. The next step is just, hey, it will do your job. So if you're not moving, you're going to lose that battle. Initially you had manual QA, then all of a sudden QAs were expected to do automation. Then all of a sudden CI/CD, that the next step would be even more. 5 minutes later I got a call, hey, you got hired.
This is Rody, 13 years in test automation, senior level expertise. And he just told you something most people in QA don't want to hear. Your field is changing faster than most people realize. Not in 5 years, not someday in the future. It's changing right now. But here's what makes this perspective different. He saw the shift coming early, made a bold move to add DevOps to his skill set, and now he's freelancing with projects he could never have landed before. So today I'm breaking down my full interview with Rody about the future of QA and test automation and the real impact of AI on testing roles. You will learn the specific skills that matter, how to learn them without quitting your job, and the specific path that he took to become a highly demanded, future-proof engineer. And this is not theory, this is not a hype. This is what's actually happening in the market right now. And throughout this conversation, I will break down the technical concepts and what this means for you, whether you are in QA engineering, thinking about DevOps, or transitioning from a different background, or just trying to understand where engineering careers are heading. But let's start with how Rody even realized he needed to make this change. Welcome, and let's dive into some interesting topics. But before we jump into, why you decided to go the freelance way, which is another interesting topic, let's go a little bit back in history to basically understand your whole journey and how it all started. So you enrolled in our DevOps bootcamp while you were still an employee at a company. I'd like to bring us back to that time. So you were already a senior in test automation, right? So why did you decide to add DevOps to the mix? Because while there are a lot of QA and test automation engineers who are trying to learn DevOps or add that to the skill, it's not the most common path, so to say. So what were you hoping to achieve by learning DevOps on top of your already senior level expertise of test automation?
Yes, at that point in time, I was working for a company, and that company, they did not have an actual testing environment. Everything that they tested with Docker Compose locally. Mm-hmm. And their staging environment was basically a production environment. So you could not really do anything there to affect data because it always was affecting production data as well. Then someone had the idea, why don't we set up a Kubernetes cluster? But at that point in time, I only knew about CI/CD, so for example Jenkins, GitLab, that sort of stuff. But then there was one DevOps engineer that was really interested in that idea as well. So I was learning from him how it worked, let's say setting up a cluster, connecting to Linux machines. And then I actually saw, oh wow, that's actually quite interesting. If you have that skill and you can combine it with, for example, the pipelines, that can be really interesting. He also said to me, because GitLab has a feature called review apps. Mm-hmm. Basically, it's also spinning up an ephemeral environment, but then a Kubernetes cluster. That really triggered me to say, hey, oh, wow, this is really interesting for testing purposes to move everything more towards the left with the shift left testing methodology. And then I was looking online to see, okay, what kind of course can provide me this information.
Can you tell me what was your specific day-to-day work like back then? So before you even had a very specific realization of I need to kind of add this specifically DevOps, full spectrum of DevOps skill set to my skills. What did your day-to-day look like? And what was the struggling point that you kind of bumped into as a test automation engineer? You already mentioned a few kind of use cases, but tell me what it looked like exactly. What were the points where okay, I'm hitting an obstacle here, I'm hitting another, so that made did you kind of decide, okay, I need the full DevOps, and not because you could have also said, I'm just going to learn Ansible or I'm just going to learn Kubernetes, and then, which is how a lot of people actually approach it, where they try to learn like one technology, like let me just learn Docker and, maybe like automation around Docker. Let me just do the CI/CD. But you decided I need the full spectrum of DevOps. Kind of take me back to that kind of decision-making process and reasoning.
What the day-to-day looked like was we had a test team with, I think, 3 or 4 engineers where I was like the lead. And they had a mono repo, but the mono repo's pipeline was really difficult and very complex for unnecessary reasons. That much I did understand. Like if I looked at it, was, really with a lot of if-else statements, was not really easy to work with. So then at that point we said, okay, we need a separate repository. But what you're then doing, you're separating yourself from the development cycle purely because the pipeline was not good. At that point in time, we did a lot of test work for like API tests, performance tests, UI tests. But I knew, because I did already some GitLab course a while back, and then I knew that with GitLab you could use like parent-child pipelines. Based on that information, I went about it to contact and move testing more towards the left again. But that had so many obstacles. Like I said, like the connecting of the GitLab pipelines, how they spun up their testing, but also their application, but also everything that I saw, the Linux machines that they had, they were all like, everybody installed it their way. So a lot of tools were not available on these machines. Well, I knew, because I have also some DevOps colleagues and friends that I knew about Terraform and Ansible and what it did. That for me was already, okay, hey, maybe I need to look more towards that and combine it with testing. But initially the drive was more, we see that testing is all the way at the end and it's very complex to change this pipeline. So the DevOps senior engineer came with the idea of, hey, we can do a Kubernetes cluster and we can connect it to GitLab to move basically everything to the left. So that was basically it. Yeah.
Let me pause here and explain what Rody just described, because this is the fundamental shift happening in testing right now. Traditional testing workflow looks like this. Developers write code, they push it, it gets built, it gets deployed to a staging environment, and then QA tests it. The problem? By the time you find bugs, the developer has moved on to the other work. The feedback loop is days or even weeks long, and this is expensive and slow. Shift left in testing means moving testing earlier in the development cycle. Instead of testing at the end or later in the cycle, you test while the code is being written, when it's pushed, or when the pipeline first runs. But to do this effectively, you need infrastructure that can spin up quickly, run tests, and tear them down. That's where ephemeral environments for testing come in. So think about it. What if every time a developer opened a pull request, you could automatically spin up a complete testing environment with the database, all the dependencies of the application itself, all the services, and run your tests against it and then just destroy it? That's what Rody was seeing as something that was needed or demanded from his job position, especially as a senior level test engineer. But to build this, you can't just know Selenium or Cypress. You need to understand Docker, Kubernetes, infrastructure as code, CI/CD pipelines, and cloud platforms at a deeper level. This is why QA and DevOps are merging, because of that new requirement for the job. The best testing practices now require infrastructure skills. And companies, if you check the job market and analyze yourself, you will see they're desperately looking for people who can bridge this gap. So during that process, like I'm pretty sure you had multiple touch points, right? Because, setting up a Kubernetes cluster and connecting to GitLab is more easily said than done. So during those touch points, did you have like a realization of this is actually enjoyable for me? Like I like working with this stuff. And also, did you have a realization of, or what was your decision making process like? Did you think, I'm going to stay a senior test automation engineer and just learn these DevOps tools so I could do my work better? Or did you already start thinking about, I actually would like to do more of this and then kind of become or transition more into DevOps role with my background of test automation? Like, how was it for you?
Yeah, well, basically the latter. I really enjoyed, let's say, the more technical things, and not to discredit test automation, because I really like and enjoy test automation. But I feel like these frameworks, they really overlap with each other. Like the other Cypress is very similar to Playwright. Of course, it has some discrepancies between the one and another. But when I was really doing the technical stuff that I didn't know, I felt the enjoyment that I was like, oh, wow, this is actually interesting and challenging because I don't know. So that was definitely one of the triggers for me. And I'm not saying that test automation is easy, because every problem has its own difficulty, let's say. But I felt that it would be, for me, a skill that would be very useful and helpful to get to know and learn, because I could use it in my day-to-day. But next to that, it was also really challenging. And for me, in jobs, I really need to be challenged to stay motivated and to move forward, because I'm quite ambitious. Well, at that point, I didn't feel like I could gain a lot more from test automation alone. And in the field, of course, as I mentioned before, you have test automation, which is really nice, but without CI/CD, it's not really helpful. So I already knew that CI/CD part was interesting. And now with Kubernetes and the other tools, it made much more sense for me to chase that as a goal for my career.
Did you also make the decision a little bit based on like what the future job requirements would look like? Like, did you consider that in that mix?
Definitely. What I see in the field with QA is that initially you had manual QA, then all of a sudden QAs were expected to do automation, then all of a sudden CI/CD. So I can already, well, at least in my opinion, I think that the next step would be even more, because technology is moving forward. So QA also needs to move with, for example, with AI or with infra as code, these kind of things. So I thought it was a logical next step for me personally, at least.
This is really important. Rody just described something I call the framework ceiling. Once you've learned one test automation framework, learning the next one is not that challenging. The patterns are the same. The concepts repeat. But infrastructure and DevOps, that's a completely different level of complexity. And here's what matters for your career. Complexity equals value. The harder something is to learn and do, the more companies will pay for it. If you can be replaced by someone who watched a 3-hour Udemy course, you are in a vulnerable position. But if you understand how to architect, test infrastructure, configure Kubernetes clusters, or design CI/CD pipelines, that's expertise that takes time to build. And that's what makes you valuable, because other people cannot easily replicate that. So it makes you automatically stand out. Okay, now you decide, this is interesting for me, it is challenging, which also kind of sparked your motivation and desire, but it's still challenging to learn, right? Especially because there are a lot of technologies involved. Even though as a senior test automation engineer, you do know a lot of things, but a lot of the things in DevOps are completely new that you have to learn from scratch. What was your learning process like initially? Like, you checked the YouTube, obviously, to kind of get some insights. Did you try any courses? Did you try any specific tutorials? How did you plan your own learning at the beginning, considering that you had to learn so many technologies and their integrations with each other?
Yeah, so initially, let's say before I found the bootcamp, I did Udemy courses, but they just touch upon one topic. I have yet to find an actual Udemy course that explains a lot. You had something in the cloud, you had, for example, Terraform, but other than that, it wasn't really like an actual mix. So first I tried those things, but then in the reality, because the different companies that I worked with, the friends that I have and the colleagues that I have, they all said, it's much more than that. There's Ansible to configure it, there's Terraform to make the actual environment. So all these things, they're interconnected. That was for me also more of a trigger, let's say, to look for something else that touched upon these topics based on what I heard from friends and colleagues. After doing these separate courses, let's say, I finished them, so I got and obtained more knowledge. But when I started the bootcamp, let's say I think it was chapter 8 or 9 where we did Kubernetes, that's where it actually, for me, even though that I already did Kubernetes together with the senior engineer, it was really difficult to comprehend in the beginning for me to really understand, okay, what am I actually doing? What do I actually want to do? And those topics I just reiterated like many times Well, I also told you that I got a daughter, and that also stopped me during the process, let's say, to keep learning. So every time, even though it was inconvenient, I needed to start again. But actually, that part actually helped me to really grasp the concepts and really apply it.
So when you did these isolated courses, because this is also probably our biggest USP like ever, and that was like extremely important for me because I learned DevOps from zero, right, at some point. So I tried to imagine myself in the shoes of someone who is trying to do the same. So when you did like an isolated Udemy, did you do Terraform or Kubernetes? Okay. When you did Terraform course on Udemy, you clearly felt like, okay, I did learn something, like I know a little bit of syntax, I know how to actually use it and create some projects in an automated way. Did you feel like the knowledge was missing, or was it really the feedback from your colleagues, or was it the gap that you were seeing at work, like you couldn't actually implement it for the actual work that you needed to do, or what were you actually missing in terms of knowledge?
That's a good question. For me, I learned the syntax and stuff, but you still need to configure that environment. So then also, you can do the Terraform, but it's not the nicest way. Also, that's something what my colleague said. So then Ansible was already missing. And based on the jobs that I did, the job that I had where Kubernetes cluster was implemented, that was my last payroll job, let's say. Before that, I worked in a company that really was DevOps minded. So I already saw how it worked there. So I already thought, hey, okay, if there they used 90% of what you used in the bootcamp. So based on that information, I knew already, hey, there's so much more than just Terraform and AWS to go with. And that also took me a little bit further down the line to say, hey, okay, I can do Terraform, is very nice, the syntax part. But afterwards, how can I now install actually tools on that environment that is being created? More like the knowledge that I obtained from the job before the Kubernetes cluster actually already showed me that, DevOps was far more, and I need to know far more than just one tool within that stack.
Okay, interesting. So you basically have this infrastructure provisioned by Terraform, and then you were like, okay, I need to install stuff on it, and Terraform is kind of where it stops. So I need to learn Ansible or some type of automation to continue with that. It's interesting because you're not only using these courses, but you actually have work environment and colleagues who are DevOps engineers where you're, working on these projects and you have exposure to Kubernetes. And I think this is also an interesting side because you're working with Kubernetes. You have colleagues who probably configure and administer the cluster and kind of show you how it works. What was missing from the practical work experience? Like, you have the course, you have the practical lab, so to say, at work. What was difficult, or what was the knowledge gap that you had from actually working with the cluster that you had to somehow fill in with either theoretical knowledge or some hands-on practice outside the work?
But do you mean then a company that I work for where I set up the cluster? There it was like the senior DevOps engineer, he really taught me a lot. Like of practices, we did a lot with Helm, but still, I saw the knowledge was missing because, if someone does it next to you, that's very nice. And you can see, oh, hey, he does it like this because A, B, or C. But actual hands-on experience is different. So then on working time, we did first with Helm. We did some things to, for example, set up, dev and acceptance cluster. And, obviously like the values and variables. But then I wanted to get a little bit more hands-on. So he showed me, hey, you can also remove environments like this and add pods like this. That hands-on experience showed me something from Kubernetes, let's say 10%. But that really triggered me to say, hey, okay, this is really interesting because I don't know, but I see what it can do because, he did it like very, very fast and very easy. Mm-hmm. But that actually was for me a trigger to say, hey, okay, I need to get more hands-on experience. And that was really one of the things that I thought, I need to do something with Kubernetes. But also then I also looked at Udemy for a Udemy course for Kubernetes. It was fine, but it's really difficult for me to see, let's say, the whole picture. And I, at least from my QA perspective, I try to think always as a high level for how could I utilize something like this. And then I didn't really grasp it. So that was also something that I felt I need to get more in-depth knowledge about how these tools work together.
Let me pause here again. So this is the biggest problem I see with how most people try to learn DevOps. They learn tools in isolation. You take a Terraform course, then you take Kubernetes course, you do some Docker tutorial, and each course teaches you syntax, some basic fundamentals and concepts. But here is what they don't teach you, which is way more important than just learning basic concepts and syntax. How do these tools actually work together in production, in actual projects. So let me show you what a real workflow looks like. You use Terraform to provision your infrastructure, your EC2 instances, your VPC, your security groups. Then use Ansible to configure those servers, install Docker, set up monitoring agents, configure firewall rules, then use Docker to package your application. Then you move the whole thing to Kubernetes to orchestrate those containers. Then you use Jenkins or GitLab to automate this entire process in a CI/CD pipeline, and use Prometheus and Grafana to monitor everything within the cluster. So see how all these tools are connected in one end-to-end project? Because learning Terraform syntax is step one, and it's probably the easiest thing and something that AI can even handle, at least 70% of it. But understanding where it fits in the bigger picture and how to integrate it with other tools, that's what actually makes you job ready and your skills way deeper and more valuable. And this is why when I created the DevOps Bootcamp, I built it around this complete end-to-end projects. You don't just learn Kubernetes. You learn how to provision the cluster with Terraform, how to deploy applications with Helm for microservices applications, set up monitoring and alerting, integrate everything into a CI/CD pipeline for automatic deployment, configure security best practices, because that's what you'll actually do at work. So there's no point teaching you something that you either will not be using at work or will not prepare you enough for the actual work. But if you want to get started on this path yourself, we've actually put together a free DevOps roadmap with the exact step-by-step guide of what to learn in which order, plus a detailed weekly study guide that we created for our students, and we're gonna link this in the description. Whether you learn with us or with someone else, I want you to use that resource as a guide to help you get started and actually learn by doing real projects instead of just passively watching some tutorials and doing Udemy courses that only give you some shallow understanding of different tools. And to have the actual projects to practice with, you can also download our demo projects handout for the DevOps Bootcamp. Again, for free, it's gonna be in the link below. Go through those projects and try to build them, try to troubleshoot them, because they will give you that real world practice and knowledge that will prepare you for the actual job, and not just some super simple Terraform project that does basic thing that any AI will generate as a boilerplate code. At some point, you realize that you need something which kind of fills all the gap and makes you understand the picture, and you decided to enroll in DevOps Bootcamp. And our DevOps Bootcamp is pretty intensive, and it takes a long time. And you mentioned that by module 8 or 9, you actually saw this, where we build this entire end-to-end process. That's where like everything kind of clicked together. First of all, with your busy schedule, with your having a daughter, having a full-time job, how did you manage to stick to it long enough that you actually consumed most of the bootcamp, which, it takes time, it takes discipline, dedication to actually stick to it and get so far in the bootcamp that you were actually learning and working with these like production grade, like end-to-end setups. What was your learning discipline or schedule like?
Before my daughter was born, I already had the course. So then I did like most of the work and I went through it. But for me with learning, I always need to go over it a couple of times to really grasp it. So then at some point, I was then still working in the payroll company. At some point, I really noticed that I need to learn more. So I just set aside time every, let's say the first 1.5 hours of the day. I just woke up a little bit earlier, did the 1.5 hours of the course, that I had a fresh mind to start with. And then when I got even more into it, then I was like, yeah, okay, I can also do it like at the end of the day. So let's say when I was finishing up work, I just stopped a little bit early and just continued with the course because it was also needed for work. And they agreed that would be a good approach for me to learn more faster. So that was first of a little bit my routine. And then after my daughter was born, it was a little bit more complicated, especially in the beginning, to combine the two. But at some point, we're quite lucky that if my daughter, she sleeps really well. So that also means that I can spend some time on the course. And my wife was very supportive to do it because I told her that like, I really want to do this to finish that course. She's also like me, quite ambitious. She understood it. And that basically meant that at some point, I think it was like in November or December, that I really like went all out to just do it because I knew I could do it in the evening when my daughter was asleep. So that was basically my routine. And then I think in January or February, I think I pushed everything to be looked at, let's say, to get the certificate. One of the things that I really liked that, you can get a certificate, because with the other courses, it was nice, but I really like to get that certificate that I've done it all, especially because it was like a 6-month thing. And I was like, oh, wow, I need to really, for my own peace of mind, let's say, that I want to have it done so that I have a certificate and that I can be proud of myself to finish it.
So this is important, guys, and I want to be really direct about this because it's the number one excuse that we usually hear from people, which is, I don't have time to learn, which is completely understandable. Rody had a newborn daughter. He was working full-time and he still found 1.5 hours in the morning before work, plus the evening sessions or the weekend sessions when his daughter was sleeping. And that's not because he had more hours in the day than you, it's because he made it a priority. Take on that sacrifice for a short period of time so that he could benefit from it for months or years down the line. So it was just a temporary sacrifice. And here's the reality. If you track your screen time on your phone right now or on your laptop, you'll probably find 2 to 3 hours a day on social media, YouTube, or Netflix. I'm not saying don't relax, especially after work, but if you're serious about changing your career, you need to make temporary sacrifices. So 6 months of focused learning, that's what it takes. Not 6 years, 6 months. And then that investment again pays off for the rest of your career. Rody is a perfect example because he's now freelancing at higher rates with better projects and more options because he put in those 6 months of time and effort. If you're waiting for the perfect time when you'll have less work, less stress, no family obligations, and unlimited free time, you will wait forever because it may literally never come. So learn to find the time now in your current busy schedule with the constraints that you have right now. In the bootcamp, so I think it's starting from module where you learn how to set up the CI/CD pipeline, where you kind of connect it to the AWS and then Kubernetes, even before, Terraform, Ansible, and Prometheus or Python modules actually come. I actually feel like for our students, that should be like the golden part where they finally feel like this confidence or this feeling of like, okay, now I really have the big picture understanding, even before going to Terraform. I would like to hear your perspective. Like, did you have any specific project or specific lecture of technology during the bootcamp that made you feel like, okay, like now I feel like those knowledge gaps are filled, that was preventing me from seeing the big picture in a way that I can make it the architecture decisions, or I can decide, let's shift this a little bit, or let's make this kind of combination with our tools so that we have faster tests or whatever. Do you remember if you had that moment at some point in the modules or in the bootcamp?
Yeah, for me that was after Kubernetes because it was really complex, but then I was still doing, let's say, the work on a daily basis for that company. So when I had that, I really had the feeling, oh wow, and I have an actual overview, and especially because I did it a couple of times. That was one. I like also to experiment, so I was busy with the work, but it always intrigues me then. I think 11 was Terraform and 15 was Ansible. So I knew that I also would need those things. So then I said, okay, hey, I know now with the cluster how that would work. I want to dive into 11 to Terraform to see if the learnings that I made with the Udemy course are similar. Then I knew based on how it worked, for example, at that other company, that, hey, I want to do Ansible as well. So I skipped first a couple of blocks because I was just intrigued. So, hey, okay, if I have that knowledge, I can also fix that problem at work.
And did you feel like the projects were close to what you were doing at work in terms of complexity and in terms of like the combination of different tools and not
Definitely.
Kind of simplified version of the reality?
No. For me, I don't want to say it's a one-on-one, but it has like at least 80% overlap for at least what the job I had then. But I also still see it now. I have now working in a different company, freelance. But there I see also like there's so much correlation with the learnings that I made based on that. And I'm more a little bit like, I also did a Kubernetes course to get a little bit more. To be honest, that bootcamp, I see from all the jobs that I had, that there's really a lot of overlap. Exercises and the demos, let's say, are really like, well, what I see in the field.
That's interesting because you're now working actually multiple projects, right, as a freelancer. So you can compare like different projects and you can see kind of a pattern, right, between the projects where, okay, this is how most of the companies are doing it. Is it similar for all the projects, or is it just for Kubernetes, or is it same for like Terraform and the CI/CD concepts and stuff?
Well, I was working for a government assignment. There they had also like there was really a lot of overlap. Jenkins, OpenShift, with like not really a lot like Kubernetes. And there I also implemented configuration as code. Because they had like some Windows machines. And then in another assignment, then there was more Terraform and AWS, which I used. So there was definitely a lot of the tools that were shown in the bootcamp that, made me quite comfortable to do it in these projects as well. Because there was a lot of overlap between these projects.
Okay, that's amazing to hear. From the engineer's career perspective, I think we engineers have such a luxurious position of we have a job that is transferable globally with the skills, which is not given for all the industries, right? If you're a lawyer, for example, you're kind of bound to your like one country's regulations and laws, and you have to learn new stuff in every country. But as an engineer, like all the projects kind of look the same, whether it's a government or commercial company, whether it's Netherlands or US, which is amazing, actually. I think engineers should take advantage of that.
Definitely. I see a lot of overlap between, the assignments that I had, there's really a lot of overlap. And of course, you have some tool that it may be different or some extra tool that you might need. But I saw a lot of overlap. Yeah, definitely.
Again, you decide to put in not only the money, but also time and so much effort in learning the whole DevOps by going through this complete bootcamp, getting the certification, not skipping all the modules, because we have a lot of people who, let's say, find a job by module 9 or 10, right? And they kind of get the job and they kind of skip the last modules because they're like, I've achieved my goal. What is your perspective of like, what was your return on that time and effort that you invested in learning DevOps on top of your already like senior level position? And how do you think it affected your career since you had that full like confident knowledge of DevOps?
The last part, because I could pick better jobs that fitted my profile better because, well, as I said in the beginning of the conversation, there's like with QA, there's a lot of stuff that's going on with DevOps kind of like pipeline, this kind of thing. But with QA, you don't see really like a Terraform and all these kind of things unless you actually work there, but it will not be in the vacancy, I mean. Then at some point, I got really excited because I saw an assignment, but it had a lot of Terraform. That's the assignment which I'm working on now. AWS, Terraform, Kubernetes, EKS, like all these things. That really made me happy. So I thought, okay, why not apply? And then I'm quite, as I said earlier in the conversation, I'm quite ambitious. So I made a project. They do AWS serverless. Mm-hmm. I am not familiar with AWS serverless at that point. But then I thought, okay, I can help with the rest and learn it a little bit on the job. So I made one project. And that's why I think, for me at least, they're also playing around with these tools made it really a good learning experience for myself. So I made all these DevOps projects myself. And then I did AWS serverless, and then I had the interview. And then I showed, hey, okay, maybe I'm not the person that you're seeking, but here is my motivation. What do you think? And they said, wow, that's really cool. And then at some point I got the job, and now I am doing, let's say, the things that first look a little bit far away, but now are in reach.
What was the interview like, the technical part? Did they test you on a lot of the technical skill set? Did you have to show just like a project portfolio, or how complex was it?
And I did also this course, and that was then your course. And they said, oh, that's really interesting. So you are quite comfortable with these kinds of tools. I said, yeah, I'm quite comfortable. I just finished it, this and that. I am about to finish it, sorry. And they said, okay, that's cool. And then 5 minutes later, because it was online, that meeting, 5 minutes later, I got a call, hey, you got hired. So.
Wow. Okay,
yeah,
so you were very convincing.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah. Did you also send along like your project portfolio, like to showcase your DevOps knowledge somehow?
Yeah, definitely. For me, I sent that portfolio to, I knew that I had one interview. I always like to research a little bit about people when I have an interview. And I saw that he really got a lot of affinity with DevOps as well. So I sent him the projects that I made. I don't know if it played a role in his decision, but I sent it, yeah.
5 minutes. That's how fast you get hired when you position yourself correctly and have proof of your skills. Let's talk about portfolio projects, because this is what most people get wrong. They think they need 10 different projects showing 10 different tools, but that's not what employers want to see. What they want to see is 1 or 2 solid, complex, end-to-end projects that show that you can build real complex things. So here's what makes a portfolio project valuable. First of all, it needs to integrate multiple tools. Don't just show me a Terraform script that provisions 3 EC2 instances and some network configuration. Show me a project where you use Terraform to provision infrastructure, Ansible to configure those newly provisioned servers, then using Docker to Dockerize an application, Kubernetes to deploy to it, and CI/CD pipeline that automates the entire deployment process. Second, it needs to be well documented. Your README should explain what the project does, the architecture decisions that you made, and how to run it. Because it shows, in addition to the code and the configuration files, it actually shows your thinking and reasoning and understanding behind the architecture. And this also shows that you can communicate, which is half the job. Third, it should solve a real problem or demonstrate a real use case. Rody's projects showed ephemeral test environments, a real problem that he was solving at work. That's way more compelling than a Hello World application. And here's the key. The interviewer knew about the DevOps Bootcamp. They knew the quality bar of the projects. That's social proof. When you can say, I completed this structured program that's known in the industry, it kind of pre-qualifies you. Just one of the reasons why Rody got hired in 5 minutes instead of going through 6 rounds of interviews. Now, I'm not saying you need to do our DevOps Bootcamp specifically. In fact, if our free resources help you, if you want to study yourself, I'm going to be more than happy. But you do need some form of structured, complete learning that results in real projects that you can show at the end as your portfolio. And random Udemy courses do not give you that. Regardless of whether you learn with us or by yourself or with someone else, use any free time that you have to actually build projects that actually integrate the tools properly. And ideally with some specific, realistic use case. That's what gets you hired. And that's what really demonstrates your skills. So from your expertise in that field specifically, what do you think? Like if you imagine 5 or 10 years from now, what do you think that job looks like? Like does it even have the same title? You know, does it have completely different responsibilities and tasks? If you had to make a prediction, like how would that job look like in like 5 to 10 years?
I will not be held accountable if I'm wrong, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in 5 or 10 years, I think the lines are quite blurry already between testing and QA engineers' responsibilities and pipelines, and this has just evolved like this over time. I think really that there will be a responsibility for the QA to have at least platform experience, platform knowledge within DevOps, because that's how it already evolved. And I think it would be like really a mix between the two at some point. I don't know if that's 5 years, and I also don't know the name of that engineer. But I see that the skill sets, they are really like overlap.
I have a similar opinion about not only QA, but generally a lot of engineering roles that are specialized. So for example, software developers are very specialized in terms of like, you know, you have front-end developers or React developers who are very specialized into one technology or writing code, so to say. So I always try to tell community, like if we logically just trace the steps in the future, the easiest thing that the AI is trying to automate right now is actual like specialized skill, which is writing code, the boilerplate, moving to decision to like architecture and architecture design roles, in addition to having the expertise of how to actually do the stuff so that you can manage the AI output. I personally think that most of the IT professions are going into having that high level overview. No matter if you're a QA or software engineer or a cloud engineer, like understanding what is the high level decision that we have to make for a project, for a business, because those small steps, like Terraform, you can write a boilerplate of Terraform automation if you know what you're automating, right? But if you don't understand the big picture of what the infrastructure should look like with the best practices so it's production ready, then you don't know what to even automate or what kind of tests to generate.
Because I also see, if I look, for example, to QA now, you can write automation. I was reading an article yesterday, I don't know where anymore, but I read an article yesterday, and that article, it mentioned already that AI can already, let's say, visually compare, let's say, the test that they're writing. So it can already do basically the whole job, because you have now agents, you can get exactly what you say, boilerplate. The next step is just, hey, it will do your job. So if you're not moving, I think you can use AI, but you should work with it rather than working against it, because you're going to lose that battle. So I agree that, if you don't hop on that train, let's say, then it's quite difficult eventually.
This is reality. AI is already automating significant parts of QA work. Test code generation, visual regression testing, even some level of test planning. AI tools can do this now, which is a little bit scary for QA or test engineering professionals. I understand that, but here is what AI cannot do. Architecture, strategy, integration, judgment about what actually needs to be tested and how, understanding the business context and making trade-offs. All of these things still remain very difficult for AI to take over. So the QA role is not disappearing, it's actually evolving from you just write tests to architect the test infrastructure and strategy. And that requires DevOps skills, especially the CI/CD automation part. You need to understand how to set up the environments, how to configure the pipelines, how to integrate these different tools with each other and make architectural decisions. So if you're a QA engineer who is still doing purely manual testing, or even just writing automation scripts without understanding the infrastructure, you are in a very vulnerable position. But if you can design and build ephemeral test environments, architect CI/CD pipelines with proper test stages, and integrate security scanning, you are extremely highly valuable. And by the virtue of the fact that most people will not do anything about it and will not take action, you will naturally stand out if you do this hard work of learning DevOps. So talking about next steps and next skills, I think you're planning to do the DevSecOps as well, right? Now the question is, why do you think you want to add security in that mix? Considering, and this is also an interesting topic because DevOps is already rare enough. Sure, there are a lot of DevOps engineers and a lot of people who are learning DevOps, but knowing DevOps properly, not having any skill gaps, like the all-rounded knowledge, that's already pretty rare. You don't have too many options there in terms of engineers who have that skill. But DevSecOps is like a layer on top, and there are very few really good DevSecOps engineers in the world. This is a skill which is extremely rare. I wouldn't say you have a pressure to learn DevSecOps because, with your test automation expertise, with the well-rounded DevOps knowledge, you're already really well set. But now you are saying, I want to do DevSecOps as well. I want to go through this, which is another 6 months, with our DevSecOps bootcamp because it's more advanced, right? Again, what is your motivation and why do you think specifically security on top of DevOps is important for you as a next skill set?
I definitely am not done with learning within DevOps. But I see DevSecOps as a logical next step because also if I look at the market, there's more and more hacks going on. Security needs to be good, especially when you're working with big companies or any company of some sort. And if you have then these security gaps because no one has that skill set, and I think, that's really a good position to maneuver yourself in. because there's like really a big demand. If I look at the market, there's really a big demand in people in security, but not a lot of people to fill it. And if I think about my next step, I want to have, like, as I said, a combination of DevOps, test automation, and security eventually, because I feel like that really would position myself so well in the market that I can do these kinds of jobs that, well, there's a lot of demand in. And then I think the money aspect also plays a role a little bit, that I feel like, yeah, if the market is really good, you can also ask more. That is one of my motivators to do that DevSecOps. I feel that I always need to be challenged. And I saw that with the normal DevOps bootcamp, it was already really well structured, because at some point you already promoted it on your website, and I was like really intrigued already from, can I do already something like this? And then I thought, no, I need to really finish the DevOps bootcamp, get that skill set, and then learn more about the security aspect of it, because I think it's a powerful thing to have in your CV or in your toolbox. Yeah.
So I have two final questions for you. First of all, if someone who is, again, for test automation engineers or QAs, let's say they're convinced that they need to learn DevOps or CI/CD automation, what would you suggest them to learn as the very first step or the simplest entry point into DevOps?
I would say pipelines. For me, together with Docker, because if you have that foundation, then that skill set you can also, I don't say it's a one-on-one, let's say, movement to Kubernetes, but I think it makes a transition to Kubernetes a little bit easier if you know a little bit about containers. So that I would definitely recommend to start there. I think that for me it would be a really good starting point to start there. And then it's easier to transition to a little bit more complex stuff.
Probably CI/CD pipeline is the closest to their already existing tasks, right? Because your tests are supposed to be run as part of the pipeline. So understanding not only your test steps in the pipeline, but the big picture of like how the pipeline is configured and run. What would you say in terms of, because let's say you're learning GitLab or Jenkins, most of the DevOps tools have these two parts, which is administration and setup and configuration and usage, right? You can create a pipeline on an existing configured Jenkins server where you just write a Jenkins pipeline file, the pipeline as code, basically. So would you also recommend for them to just dive into how to use this tool, how to create a pipeline? Or did it help you to understand, how is Jenkins server even configured? Like, how do I install tools on top of that? The administration part of the tools.
Yeah, for me, it was more first the usage, because when I was working at a company before a Kubernetes class, I really had already like a lot of exposure to DevOps. And then at that point in time, I made the pipeline for QA purposes together with a friend of mine who was also working there. So then I already got a lot of experience, but how they initially set it up, like with shared libraries, I had no idea about. And I think that's also like more of a like higher level architectural thing. And that actually was also quite interesting to see, hey, how can we make multiple pipelines, but don't, duplicate code. But that is what I then learned in the bootcamp. Initially, for me, it was more about the usage and how can we make it more efficient? How can we get faster test results to the stakeholders? Because at that point in time, I knew about pipelines, but I didn't know enough. And he said, you can do it also with parallel. I said, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
If you can do parallel, you can speed it up. So basically, just first look at what is currently there, because most companies, they already have some certain CI/CD in place. So I think it could be a really good starting point for you to experiment as a QA with pipelines. To say, hey, if there's no QA involved yet, just duplicate the pipeline and see, can you add, for example, Cypress or Playwright to it that actually works and that it's coming from a Docker image, for example. Those are really like low threshold things you can learn to get more familiarity with DevOps and CI/CD in general, I think.
Mm-hmm. So looking back, what do you think you would do differently in your learning journey? Or would you do anything differently?
To be honest, I think due to the complexity with my learning journey that I would keep it the same. Because I did it multiple times, and especially the Kubernetes, I did that I think 3 or 4 times. I went through that material because I stopped and then I started again. And that actually gave me a really good, knowledge base, because I just did it so many times. So for me, I would not change my journey, but it's also the way how I learn. I think for someone else, if that person can learn it in one time.
I think that's actually a great advice, So did you do the entire Kubernetes demos, like in the Kubernetes module of the bootcamp, or did you do like the end-to-end, or did you really do like the entire module?
Everything, the entire module. Yeah. Because for me, there was like gaps, like I did it and then I stopped after 2-3 weeks. And then if you then start up again, you have that knowledge somewhere in your mind, but it's not like fresh. So then I thought, yeah, okay, I just want to start fresh. And then it also started clicking more and more because, yeah, the topics, they're quite abstract in the beginning. And that definitely helped me get over the...
I think that's a really good advice. My perspective is usually like, even if you look at something like, it's going to take me 6 months, and especially you're saying like, do multiple times the same thing so it really, really sticks, and then maybe do DevSecOps. Like in total, it's 1 year, which is long, but it's also not that long if that 1 year of investment is going to pay off for you like decades, right? For 10 years, let's say, or 20 years. Do you approach it with the same perspective? Like, do you think about like, this is going to pay off for like 10 years, or this is enjoyable for me? I'm just going to do it because at least for the next few years, it's going to be beneficial.
Look, I don't know decades, but for me, definitely the upcoming years, as already mentioned, I feel like the market is going more towards that side. So it's a good skill set to have. And especially now also with AI, because you can position yourself very well. This is for me the way to go. And at least for the coming 5 to 10 years, it's a good skill set to have. But also the investment of time, if I compare it on the scale, yeah, okay, if you do now directly DevSecOps after it, but what is 6 months to 10 years? It's like, for me, it's a small investment to do.
Here is what I want you to take away from Rody's story. First, your field is evolving. We cannot deny that. Pretending that it's not does not make you safe, and it doesn't protect you from losing your job. It makes you vulnerable. The QA engineers who are succeeding right now are the ones who are adapting to that change. Second, you don't need to become a DevOps engineer to add immense value. Start with just CI/CD and Docker. Understand pipelines deeply. And then you can move to Kubernetes and Terraform and cloud infrastructure as code and build on what you know already. Third, learning takes time and it's not always linear. Rody restarted Kubernetes 3 times in order to make it really stick. He started with a newborn, so his learning was interrupted very often, so he had to start over sometimes. 6 months of focused effort. That's the investment that changed his career trajectory. And fourth, position yourself as a bridge. Don't abandon your testing expertise. Just add infrastructure skills on top of that, or CI/CD pipeline skills on top of that, because that combination of test automation plus DevOps is even more rare and valuable than just one or the other. Now, if you're serious about this, you need structured learning that shows you how these tools integrate. You need projects that prove that you can build real things. And you need to start now, not when the market forces you to. The engineers who thrive in the next decade will not be the ones with the deepest knowledge in one narrow area. That has become clear by now. They will be the ones who can breach multiple disciplines, integrate systems, architect solutions, and Rody is literally proof that this path works. So if you want to take some action, as I said, we will provide the resources that we can give away for free so that you can use it to make that first step and do not delay it until it's too late. If this video and the free resources that we provide along with it are valuable, then share it with one friend or colleague who is a test or QA engineer so that they can hear this message as well. They will definitely thank you for it. And please also let me know whether you guys like this new interview style format where we're getting direct insights from engineers with specific backgrounds or specific stories themselves to see firsthand from real examples of working professionals who are succeeding in their careers. So let me know below whether you like it, what you like or dislike about it, so that we can make it even better and even more valuable for you in the future. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.